Hello, everyone. Oh, and there's Josh after all. Welcome to the Sunday Shot. Apologies that we're a little bit late coming to you this morning, but we had a few technical issues trying to get Josh joining us on the panel. He is there. Can you hear us, Josh?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Our being 5 minutes late was all worth it because we've now got Josh able to join us. I am here on the unceded land of the mighty Gadigal people, and we are thrilled that my co-host, Dave Milner, is with us.
Hey, Joe, if you want punctual, watch the ABC.
If you want slightly chaotic, but we get there in the end, watch the Sunday Shot.
And you will not hear me say Israel has a right to defend itself today. You're not going to see that on this broadcast.
No, you won't. We are absolutely thrilled as well to be joined for the first time on the Sunday Shot by the legendary Doug Cameron. Doug, thank you for getting up early on a Sunday morning and joining us.
No worries, Joe, Dave, Josh.
Good morning.
So, look, it's been a very busy week for everybody, but particularly, it would have to be said, for Josh Bornstein and his client, Antoinette Lattouf, who had the result handed down in the case Lattouf versus the ABC. I'm just going to do a quick shout out to the great story that was on Crikey on Friday about the meanings behind Antoinette's fabulous fashion-forward choices in the courtroom. Some may say that's a little bit superficial, and possibly it is, but the fact that every single outfit had a connection to Lebanese, Middle Eastern fashion designers, Australian diasporic fashion designers, I think is extraordinary. And she looked amazing and was styled by Lebanese Australian stylist Catherine Rizk. So I'm just going to put that out there. And now we're going to get on to the more substantive outcomes of the case. Josh, tell us, what did the ABC actually, say that again. What did Justice Rangier actually decide?
He decided that when the ABC took Antoinette Lattouf off air, it acted illegally on two separate grounds. One is it sacked her for her political opinion in breach of the Fair Work Act. And secondly, it sacked her effectively for misconduct without applying any of the legal obligations it had to her to provide due process and procedural fairness or natural justice. It did not. It was all done in a 2-minute conversation. There was no opportunity for Antoinette to respond to any allegations or any process whatsoever.
And quite an extraordinary thing, given the rigorous nature of the processes through which the ABC is supposed to go. And extraordinary because the judgment also revealed really the panic that had set in on the executive floor of the ABC. I mean, Justice Rangier was quite clinical in the way he exposed that.
Absolutely. It was an extraordinary experience to get a window into the ABC's management, and particularly a window into how the ABC deals with or doesn't deal with complaints, particularly bad faith complaints by powerful people. So it was quite correct to say there was a state of panic and multiple layers of management. One of the things that shocked me about the evidence was that there was huge confusion right up to the top of the ABC about corporate governance, about what impartiality requires of the ABC, what the policies require of their employees, and when they should be applied. There was no sign of anyone from people and culture. They were just sidelined as this panic drove confusion and then a very, very bad decision.
Josh,
given... Sorry, go, Dave.
No, I was just going to say, firstly,
Yes, Dave.
thank you. Just on behalf of working journalists that for whatever reason are still trying and taking this seriously despite what the world is telling us, thank you for winning this case, because it isn't just about Antoinette Lattouf, is it? It's about our relationship with the truth and the state broadcaster. And the really disturbing thing I find here is that, say I was, hypothetical, if I was a special interest group and say my special interest was perpetuating genocide, I could just call the managing director of the ABC, and it appears like they would roll over and kind of cover that up for me.
The newish managing director, Hugh Marks, has come out and, to his credit, for the first time apologised, and to his credit, been transparent about the $2 million legal spend that this case will involve. But he also said this was an isolated error, an isolated incident. And as my book, Working for the Brand, details, the malaise that's gone on inside the ABC, which led to what John Lyons, one of its best journalists, called the darkest day in ABC history when it sacked Lattouf, has had a genesis that goes back decades. And what we're witnessing is the culmination of many right-wing crusades against the ABC for 30 or 40 years, which have rendered its systems brittle and endangered the careers of many journalists, and many of whom have lost their jobs. There are countless others who have been censored or silenced or disciplined, and it has changed the crusades and the complaints and the failure to adequately address those complaints has changed what the ABC broadcasts. It's changed its content. And what I say in the book is, if you learn how to choke the complaint system, you win. And that's what's happened. And that's why we saw for the first time what was really important, the panic that drives really, really bad decisions, and at an institution which has been enfeebled, and where there doesn't seem to be the capacity to distinguish between bad faith complaints that should be dismissed. The ABC should have said to those people a number of things, but one very simple thing is, we're not going to accede to your request, because to do so would be to break the law. And particularly you lawyers who are calling on us to break the law need to have a think about your own obligations as lawyers. Lawyers are not put on this earth to encourage anybody to break the law. So there are some very simple ways this could have been dealt with, and a very bad decision was made, and then the ABC doubled down. It doubled down and acted and litigated like it was impersonating Rio Tinto in a nasty piece of litigation. It acted as if it wanted to punish Antoinette like a whistleblower.
It did, and I don't find this argument that this is just a bad apple at all convincing, because their coverage of the Gaza genocide has been horrific for 2 years. They haven't even used that word. And we're now reaching a point where the world is starting to acknowledge the true scale of this destruction. It is going to enter the conversation. People will deny it, but we are going to have a situation where the world is going to acknowledge that hundreds of thousands of people have been murdered, and the ABC still hasn't framed this in a way that reflects reality. So
as I said, if you choke the system with complaints, you shape the content. And the ABC, at the start of the conflict, banned its staff, just like Donald Trump has banned the use of certain terms in America in the public service. The ABC banned its staff from using two words, genocide and apartheid. At what point will the ABC, how many thousands of Palestinians need to die before the ABC will permit its reporters to tell the truth about a mass genocide? When will that happen? The answer is probably never. It won't matter because it is cowed by bad faith complaints.
And it was both, as Justice Rangier said explicitly, there was this orchestrated campaign that was happening by the pro-Israel lobbyists to have Ms. Lattouf taken off air. But there was also the panic that had set in because the Australian were on the case. And Doug, if I can bring you in here, the pressure that there seemed to be on the person who was found to have effectively made the decision to sack Antoinette, Chris Oliver Taylor, who's now left the organisation, he seemed to be responding and acting according to the deadline that had been set by the Australian. They wanted a response by 1:30, and so Oliver Taylor decided to act and effectively sack Antoinette before that deadline so that they could say to Sophie Ellsworth of the Australian that she was no longer on air. And that resulted in the extraordinary situation where it was reported in the Australian that Antoinette had been sacked while she was still distressed, driving home from the Australian having been sacked. So what does that say to you, Doug, about the kind of this sort of terrible nexus that now exists between the ABC and indeed other cultural organisations? Creative Australia similarly was cowed by criticism coming from News Corp. What does it say that our cultural and our media institutions are still so beholden to News Corp?
Well, it just shows the strength and influence that the Murdoch press has in Australia. It shows that our media is not working effectively. I think what arises from this is one of my pet hates about the ABC, and that is that they talk about impartiality and they talk about balance, but you don't hear them talking about the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And surely it's about the truth. It's not about being impartial. It's not about getting right-wing, apologists and, on every show to argue against something that is quite clearly wrong. They run the line on climate change. They run the line on housing. They run the line. All of the positions they take are underpinned by neoliberalism, and that's seen as balance by the ABC. It's not balance. It's just not the truth. So they should concentrate on the truth, and they should concentrate on being a better purveyor of the truth to the Australian public. That's why they're paid.
It's normalized bias. And the other thing that an editor and a managing director, their job is to protect journalists from this type of bullshit. When you're getting crank calls, again, from a genocidal cult, try to ignore it. Don't try to let it dictate your programming.
Well, I think that has been so emblematic of this particular stage in our political life, is that whether it's the senior brass at the ABC, whether it was the CEO at Creative Australia, they are not defending their employees. They are not standing up for freedom of expression, journalistic or artistic, but they are instead throwing their artists, their employees under the bus. And this has happened numerous times. Josh, with this decision, do you think that, people like, organisations like SEN, the MSO, where there's litigation still underway about Jason Gillum having been sacked for speaking up for the Palestinian people when he was introducing a piece of music which was actually about the death of journalists in Gaza. Do you think they will be feeling nervous now? Do you think this could be the first kind of brick in the wall coming down?
I certainly hope so, and time will tell. Let's just come back to the ABC for a moment. I'm still not confident that the ABC will change course.
No, me neither.
This is not, and I say that as someone who is a passionate supporter of public broadcasting and is conscious that the ABC still produces brilliant programs like Media Watch and Four Corners, almost in spite of some of the mismanagement that's going on. But I say that also because Antoinette Lattouf was not an isolated situation. Go back to Yasmin Abdel-Majid, who lost her role on the ABC after a disgraceful campaign against her by the coalition and the Murdoch press. Go back to what was exposed that the chair, Justice Milne, was seeking to do to get rid of Emma Alberici. There is a long list of journalists and even staff who aren't journalists who've lost their careers or jobs, had their careers harmed because of these responses. Responding, the easiest option for the ABC, it seems, is to respond to bad faith complaints by what it perceives as powerful people, is to get rid of the member of staff or censor them. And so I'm not sure the ABC is capable at the moment of major change. And then we come to other institutions. I hope other institutions now start to consider their legal obligations, that you cannot sack people because they've expressed a political opinion. We saw that a little bit of green shoots for the first time about 3 weeks ago when the University of Queensland had the usual campaign by the Murdoch press because Aviva Tuffield had one of its employees, who's in the publishing arm of the university, had worn a T-shirt to an awards night saying "Readers and Writers Against Genocide." So the usual mock outrage, contrived outrage campaign, bombarding the university with complaints, and the university put out a statement saying, "We are not going to sack Aviva Tuffield. We're not going to take disciplinary action. She has strong views. They're her views. They're not our views. We live in a democracy. People are entitled to participate in that democracy."
Yeah.
And
That
was almost similar to the last chapter of my book, where I said that's what the day in which that becomes normal, to put out a statement like that, is the day I dream of. And so that was, to me, the first sign that we might have institutions moving away from self-harm to preservation.
Although that was, of course, not what happened to Karen Wilde, who was to have been the recipient of a fellowship for writing that was being awarded by the State Library of Queensland. She'd flown up to Queensland to receive it, and instead of being sort of taken through her sound check, she was taken into the State Librarian's office and told that as a result of some tweets that she'd made earlier, her fellowship was being rescinded, and she didn't even have her travel costs reimbursed, which she had been promised. So,
I mean, the history, the McCarthyist witch hunt that has gone on here in America and Europe over these issues is horrific, and there are many, many people who have lost careers, awards, jobs, in service of a witch hunt, fundamentally anti-democratic, and institutions doing enormous damage to themselves.
A witch hunt in service of covering up a genocide. Let's keep this too, because it is as depraved as it sounds, and I think there are a lot of Australians that haven't quite clocked how dark this moment is yet. So,
well, the darkness can be measured by how many times have we witnessed in our lives people being slaughtered as they go to get food aid.
I mean, that has been the incredible development over the last couple of weeks, where there has been this so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which has begun operations in Gaza, but very much in southern Gaza, where it seems to be trying to hem in all of the Palestinian people who come seeking food. Over 500 people have been massacred as they have come to try and get food. We're just in an extraordinary moment, Doug. You've been very vocal about the failure, really, of the Labor Party and the current Albanese government to talk about these issues, to talk about the reality on the ground in Gaza. truthfully and transparently, if we're talking about the requirement of our institutions, including government, to speak the truth?
Look, I'm appalled at the lack of concern that's been shown by my former colleagues in the Labour Party. It's okay calling for restraint, but it has to go further than that, because it's clear that both the US, who funds the attacks on Gaza through the military ammunition that they provide Israel, and Israel itself, they are not going to stop this. And calling for restraint is just meaningless. It's just fluff and bubble in the media ether. We've now put some, small approaches to some of these Israeli politicians. We've put some sanctions on them, but surely we need a good look at what sanctions we can put in place to stop the daily killing of innocent people in Gaza and the loss of property in the West Bank from Israeli settlers. I mean, surely this is about what Labour should stand for. And I am just really appalled and disgusted that we are not taking a stronger position. And we have not heard any voices from within the party to actually stop this. I think the last time I heard anything was Josh Wilson some time ago, MP in Western Australia. Now we hear very little at all. And that's not good enough from the Labour Party. They should be more independent, they should be more vocal, and they should be stronger in standing up for human rights around the world.
I think we've heard a bit from Ed Husic. Now, of course, he's been freed from the requirement of cabinet confidentiality. We're going to go now to an interview with Peter Cronau, who was talking more broadly about the US-Australian alliance, and in particular coming out of, as we were on air last week, when the US strikes on Iran. And from there, then I'd really like to dive a bit more into the way Labor is dealing with the volatility in the Middle East generally, and what has become of the left.
We are joined by Declassified Australia's Peter Cronau, truth teller extraordinaire. Thank you for coming back to the Sunday Shot.
No worries, Dave. Good to be here.
How's World War III treating you so far? Are you well?
Yeah, well, look, it's the thing of you jump out of bed and you get the latest news, and it's like the next episode of some crazy TV serial, and but it's not on Netflix. It's real life, and the clown show happening in Washington is always entertaining, and it gets a huge amount of coverage, but not a hell of a lot of decent analysis, unfortunately.
One of the stories that you have on the website today is a very fascinating look at this report by the Brookings Institute, written for the Imperial War Machine. It's basically yet another plan for America to keep their weapons companies profitable and go murder a bunch of people in the Middle East. Can you tell us about the Brookings Institute and what is in this strategy document, please?
Yeah, look, this article that I published called the war against Iran. There's a plan that's been sitting around for a long time, for many years, decades, in fact, and I think I put it together before the bombing of the apparent nuclear sites, because you could just see the pattern, the underlying pattern being used as the plan for this. And what happens with, there's a thing called the deep state, which a lot of people don't want to use the term because it's just become tainted.
Trumpy nowadays, yeah.
But it's just the powerful, and it consists of the big oils, the big techs, the big whatevers, plus military and intelligence and various politicians. So that's the sort of beast that's there, and to work out what they want to do next, they get plans done. They don't just it might appear they shoot from the hip, but they plan it out. And the Brookings Institute is one of them. The Rand Corporation is another one of them. There's a whole bunch of different huge think tanks that are constantly working through policy ideas. And there's a terrific analyst called Brian Beletic, and he reviewed the Brookings report. So I jumped in, had a deep dive into it, and it's quite a fascinating tale, listing all the options for the US on how they can knock off the Iran regime. And it's written sort of inside the tent, speaking to each other. So it's quite unguarded in the way it goes about it. I mean, it says things like, we should, support citizen groups to rise up against the government. We should, use Israel to start a war. It actually just puts them on the table as if they're matter-of-fact discussions, which amongst this group, they are matter-of-fact discussions.
Detached psychopaths playing with the world for kicks and cash.
Incredible. And if you flip to the back page, you'll see who funds it, and it's the big tech and the big oil and the big corporations who fund this sort of research, because they want good conditions for operating in all the countries that are yet unconquered. So these reports get written, they go into the mix, they get discussed at conferences, they bounce around, they get refined. And one of the particular chapters in there, Leave It to Bibi, cynically titled, ended up being exactly what we've seen pan out in Iran. The idea of having negotiations underway, having the negotiations break down so that you can say, oh, look, we tried to negotiate with those Iranians. It's so unreasonable. We're just going to have to bomb the fuck out of them now. So that's written down before this all happened. So it's quite a revelation to see the actual policy follow, this long discussed plan that they've had, and they've had a plan to knock off Iran forever. I mean, really.
The least convincing argument for the narrative being presented by the empire is the feminist argument that Iranian women will benefit from having the shit bombed out of their cities.
It's a regular narrative that's used by media that support these sorts of things, and that is to look at the situation of women. It happened with Afghanistan. Lots of stories about the schoolgirls, the girls not being able to go to school. It happened with the Kurds. Lots of stories about brave young women fighters in the hills, fighting for democracy. It's just a touch point for the West. It's a touch point for the Democrat voters. It's a touch point here for the Labor voters to support feminism and ever forward, girls. We're just going to clean up this place. But they're being used. It's a narrative that is used to get people to support war and atrocity.
But wasn't it interesting how quickly the entire mainstream press apparatus in Australia and our government were instantly terrified of these Iranian nukes that they hadn't really mentioned before at all? They jumped to, no, we don't want to do this. Yes, we're going to go to war. No, everybody calm down. Basically on a leash from the Yanks. I thought it was a bit demeaning for the nation.
Yeah, it's awful that we just jump on board whatever the Western narrative is, and we as Australians are not able to, let alone develop our own independent foreign policy, but have an independent thinking about our foreign policy, because there's some truth bombs that need to be thrown out there into the public sphere, which are worth knowing. And one would be that how many countries has Iran invaded in the last 50 years? 20, 30, 40? None, zero. A big fat, they don't invade. They're not invading their neighbours. They're not sending warships to the South China Sea to invade China. They don't invade countries. They're too busy getting on with their own stuff. Now, they've got problems internally. They've had terrorist bombings. They've had all sorts of things going on. They've got to deal with their own stuff, but they're not a threat to their neighbours. The only reason they've looked to develop nuclear technology and potentially a bomb is for self-defence. And the Australian intelligence agencies, the ONA, Office of National Assessments, the American DIA, Defence Intelligence Agency, they all agree that Iran's policies are defensive. Their military policy, their development of nuclear it's defensive. And they even spell it out, that it's defensive against a potential American or Israeli attack. If you're looking at the terror state in the Middle East that's killing people by the bucket load, that has nuclear weapons, that is not part of any nuclear weapon control system, that has actually invaded lots of its neighbours, even countries not they're neighbouring with, such as Iran. If you look at what that country is, it's not Iran, it's Israel. And Israel gets away with it because it's a close, warm and trusted friend of the United States.
It also gets away with it because you can send a bunch of cranky emails to the managing directors of our state broadcasters, and they'll decide that it's probably worth covering up a genocide. I said that, not you. We are. I mean, the other part of this conversation that is just always left off the table, but actually makes things very clear for people, is this project of Greater Israel. And you see that they have attacked, I mean, other than Egypt, they have attacked every country in this map of Greater Israel. And Iran is in the region the only serious force militarily that could halt some of this progress. And so America's obviously standing over it, warning it not to, or it's going to get vaporized from the sky. I don't know why this never comes up in the conversation. I mean, I do know why it doesn't, but we should talk about this a little bit more, I think.
Well, Iran is infected by a very, very serious malady, and that is independent nationalism. Now, this terrible virus of independent nationalism creates countries thinking that they can choose their own policies in the world and that they can run their own resources, oil wells, whatever, and actually spend the money on their own population. Now, they're very wrong. That's not how the world works. Some countries stand up to it. Iran's standing up to it and they're paying the cost. It's not to do with the nuclear weapons. That's never the threat. The nuclear weapons is their response to the threat. The threat is that they want to be independent and they want to look after their own country and they don't want to be interfered with. They don't want to be bombed. They don't want to be, knocked off like their neighbours. One side, they've got Iraq. The other side, they've got Afghanistan, totally surrounded. They've been by wars, US bases. I mean, the number of US bases in the world tells you something about how many foreign bases has Iran got that are threatening Australia or threatening other nations? None. How many has the United States got? Over 800. How many has China got? I think it's 2. Russia, it's got a couple. France, UK. I think it's the total number of foreign bases of non-US countries is about 30. Like, if you just look at the facts, it's apparent that the narrative we're getting is full of holes. Just look at them around the world. There's been so many democratic governments elected, socialist, left-leaning governments, whether it be Allende in Chile, which we helped to topple, helped the CIA to topple, or, Iran is the classic. Why would Iran believe promises of negotiations? They can Google the Brookings report. They've read it. They're quite aware of the tactics being used against them. So, this idea that it's over and we've now got peace reigning in the Middle East is sadly not the case. It's relentless, and Iran is shortly again to be under attack. The idea is regime change. If you pull out that Brookings paper and just go through the list of chapters in it, which we've got in the Declassified Australia report on this, you can just see the different things that they can do, and they will do. So stand by.
We have a number of American military bases in Australia. How many do we have, Peter?
Well, depends who you ask.
Yeah,
if you
I thought
ask
that
the
might be the
Australian government,
case.
we have three bases that are at least partly American, and that's Northwest Cape, Pine Gap, and there's some geological survey groups in Alice Springs that sort of monitors nuclear explosions and things.
What if I asked someone that wasn't the Australian government?
Oh, there's 30 or 40, if you ask me. But I mean, they're not US bases alone. They're US access to Australian facilities bases. So Tyndall, by all intents and purposes, is an Air Force base south of, or just outside of Katherine in the Northern Territory. Lovely patch of ground up there. and it's an RAAF base, an Australian base. However, they've just been spending hundreds of millions of dollars preparing it for hosting US B-52 bombers, nuclear capable B-52 bombers, and they've got squadron facilities, accommodation. They've got hangars to put them in. They've got armaments. They've got fuel. That's just one little airstrip. It's a pretty big one, actually. And it's not called a US base. In Darwin, the airport there has the RWF section. Excuse me. And they're also building a squadron room and hangars and extended tarmac because they're going to be hosting US refueling tankers. And Australia's already had a taste of when that's finished and when they start doing it. And by the way, that's a scoop for you, that the fact that their refueling base is going to be in Darwin hasn't been published anywhere at the moment. So I think that these things are happening. Not a lot of discussion. I mean, not a lot of democratic debate about these things, and they're just happening. I can't keep up with them. We've already seen how refueling tankers based in Australia, whether they're US or Australian, are used. Tankers from Australia flew up and refueled the B-2 bombers heading over to Yemen a few months ago.
Mm-hmm.
So the death and destruction rained upon the heads of the Yemenis, the civilians killed there. We participated in that.
Mm-hmm.
Not only did we participate by allowing the refueling tanks to take off from Cairns Airport, Cairns public airport.
But wouldn't that make Cairns Airport a legitimate military target?
Well, just flip it and just say if Iran fuel tankers were being used to bomb, to support the bombing of any other country, of course it's a legitimate target in the eyes of the people we're bombing. I mean, Australia is at risk because we're hosting bases. Now, Paul Dibb, who's a pretty senior Australian defence person and analyst now, he says the base at Pine Gap will be amongst the first and most important targets for China if a conflict breaks out. So it's not just theoretical. Like he's saying, it actually is one of the first targets. Northwest Cape as well, because they communicate with the submarines and they do a whole lot of other things as well. But China will respond if we keep pushing them. And, at the moment, I think we've got a ship up in the South China Sea testing, rights of navigation through around the Spratlys. And you think, well, it's just leading in one direction. We can all see where it's headed. And where it's headed is into a confrontation with China.
A confrontation with China that America provokes, and that Australian children are used as cannon fodder on the front line for an American war. I think it's very reasonable read of the Australian Labor Party at the moment that their foreign policy, and indeed domestic policy, is almost entirely captured by American political interests. And I would say that AUKUS, though a Scott Morrison project, but these are the same people. The continuation of this, that is basically what they are securing. We're not securing submarines, they're securing cannon fodder. I can't read it any other way.
Look, absolutely. I think that there's a continuation of policy no matter which party's in power. The idea of submarines, really, will it happen? Maybe it will, but if it does, it's 2040 or something until we get the new submarines. So therefore, what's it for? What it is for militarizing Australia. It's a cover story.
Yep.
The second tranche of AUKUS, which the public's not allowed to see, we're not trusted. But the second tranche talks about the militarisation, industrialisation of Australia. It's all about, testing hypersonic missiles at Woomera. It's all about building an industrial base to support the military because, as we've seen in Ukraine, you go through a lot of missiles when you have a war. And, the more we can help pump out, the better things will be.
Peter Crennow, thank you so much for your time and insights.
No problem.
Always a pleasure.
It's been great, Dave. Thanks so much.
So we can see really a great deal of consternation about the approach that the government is taking, both in relation to AUKUS more generally and in particular around the backing of America's strike on Iran this week. Doug, if I can ask you to respond to some of what Peter was saying there, that the Labor Party has sort of blindly continued the AUKUS policy that seemed to be a political manoeuvring from Scott Morrison, and we are just not seeing the kind of internal debate within the Labor Party that had been such a fine part of the Labor tradition.
Well, blindly is the operative word. I mean, 24 hours to consider, spending, what could be $400 billion of Australian taxpayers' funds to support the UK and US industrial military complex is just crazy. I mean, and I just can't believe there is no voices within the party even raising the least critical analysis of what's happening. My recommendation to Labour Party members is read two books. Read Clinton Fernandes' Island Off the Coast of Asia, which demonstrates all of the issues that we are facing now and does that in a very scholarly manner, in a very readable manner. They should also read Malcolm Fraser's Dangerous Allies. I mean, who would have thought Malcolm Fraser, an ex-Australian Defence Minister, an ex-Australian Prime Minister on the Conservative side of politics, would be saying the things he said in that book? I don't think Labour Party backbenchers understand what they're getting into here. And this goes against the long history in the Australian Labour Party. Curtin taking an independent position, Simon Crean taking an independent position, Gough Whitlam taking an independent position, all gone. And if I can just finish on this, and I just need to read this, because this is in Clinton Fernandes' book, and he talks about John Curtin saying Australia now looks to America, right? In 1942, General MacArthur told Curtin that the United States was an ally whose aim was to win the war and had no sovereign interest in the integrity of Australia. Just think about that. He went on to say, its interest in Australia was from the strategical aspect of the utility of Australia as a base from which to attack and defeat the Japanese. It was the Empire's responsibility as the Commonwealth of Nations to jointly protect any part of Australia that might be threatened. This was not the focus of the United States. US forces were building in the Commonwealth, and this is a quote, not so much from an interest in Australia, but rather from its utility as a base from which to hit Japan. Well, aren't we seeing that happening again? And it's now China.
Yeah.
Now, I just think there is a need for, a proper debate in the Labour Party. I think there's a need for an independent, we won't get a parliamentary inquiry into AUKUS. The numbers are not there for it. There should be an independent inquiry into AUKUS. Why did we commit to this militarisation of Australia without due process and proper thought as to the implications?
Doug, can I ask you, you were a leading member of the left. What has happened to the left? What has happened to the caucus? What has happened to the left? To the extent that there's any contest about Gaza at the moment, it tends to be more from the right, from Ed Husick or Tony Burke occasionally speaking up, but in pretty limited ways. What has happened? Why? You are the only voice, as far as I can tell, bless you, that represents the left that I understood was a critical part of the Labor Party up until now.
Yeah.
Also, who is the left? I don't think I can spot them in the Labour Party. Who are we talking about?
Cusick is not seen as a member of the left.
No, he's not.
And my concern was that the left are not raising the issues. I'll tell you.
But why? Why?
Well, apparently there's a majority in caucus now. But
just be quiet for a minute. Give me a minute. If any other prime minister other than Anthony Albanese had signed off on this, there would have been uproar in the left, in the Labour Party. That's the reality. And we have a left prime minister, and I would have thought we would never get to this position. I've known Albo for decades. I would never have thought we'd get to this position. But I think it's because, people don't want to challenge him. And, without a proper debate within the party, without the public being knowledgeable about what's happening, then this will not change. You can't just come onto TV as Penny did the other day and just hide behind security. This is a major political debate that goes to the fundamental future of this country, and we need a proper look at it. And that's why I think there's plenty of people out there that could help fund a proper analysis, a proper look at what's happening to the Australian government and to us if we go down this path. Malcolm Fraser says we cannot win a war against China. So why would we be engaging with the US to confront China and inevitably result in a war with our major trading partner? It just beggars belief from my point of view.
Doug, to what degree does morality ever come into this discussion? I know I'm going to sound naive here. We're talking about security, we're talking about money, but I'm wondering about the morality question because, again, what we are talking about is giving, $400 billion for invisible submarines to an empire that is perpetually paying for genocide in the Middle East. Surely someone raises the morality question inside the Labour Party.
Well, I would have thought so, but, given that we've got ministers now, arguing that housing is not a human right, it's not important to look at it as a human right, that's the sort of mindset that seems to be predominant in the party at the moment. The last expression of real morality, I think, from within the Labour Party on this issue of the US-Australia alliance was Simon Crean. And he said three things. Never allow our foreign policy to be determined by another country. Fundamental principle. Secondly, never commit to an unnecessary war when peace is possible. And thirdly, never send Australian young men and women to war without telling them the truth. That was the morality of Simon Crean and the Labour Party at that time when we were arguing against sending troops to Iraq. And he did that before the US president. That type of courage, that type of morality, that type of commitment has disappeared. And I think it's a lack of education in the caucus. It's a lack of understanding about the implications. And it is so essential that Labour Against War, which I am a patron of, continues to argue this within the branches. And I have to say, I think the parliamentary party is getting more and more distant and remote from the feelings of the rank and file Labour Party members around the country.
It is interesting, I think, watching on that Sunday when the US had just done the strikes on Iran, there seemed to be a slightly more ambiguous message coming out from the government that they didn't want to be full-throated in their support because in the end, and Josh, I might ask for your comment on this, without any imprimatur or endorsement from the UN or any international body, you'd have to say that those strikes are indeed illegal under international law and are against the much promulgated rules-based order, which apparently we are defending. through our alliance with the US. Most international legal experts have said that the strikes were illegal. Josh, what would your take on that be?
I don't think there's any debate about that. I don't think there's any real argument that those strikes were illegal. And one got the sense initially that the government was uncomfortable with the situation. This is what I infer, I've got no evidence, that they were then pressured by the US and changed their tune to support an illegal strike or a series of illegal strikes on Iran. And it undermines, again, a long tradition in the left, but even a broader Labor tradition of trying to support the rules-based order, international law, which they've done in the attacks on Ukraine. So they end up, as a government, being easily attacked for hypocrisy and inconsistency, and ultimately contributing to the loss of any international rules-based order and the triumph of what we're seeing every day now, particularly in the last 2 weeks, is crude exercises in US power.
Can I just say that, I was engaged in many marches against war, against Iran, and there used to be a culture in the left of the Labour Party to oppose war, and that was led by Tom Uren, Anthony Albanese's mentor. And Tom Uren was out there actually every year marching, and some of the existing Labour ministers that worked with me in the Metal Workers Union were marching alongside me, and they are now calling other Labour members appeasers for taking a position consistent with Labour values over many years. I just think we've lost it. I just think we've lost the education in the party. I think a lot of it goes to the weakness that is appearing in the union movement because of decades of attacks on the union movement. The union movement used to be able to, educate activists on the shop floor who could push against some of this nonsense that you read in the Daily Telegraph and the Australian. That has been a big problem, I think, in terms of getting the broader educational values into the Labour Party.
Donald Rothwell, who's an international legal expert, said that essentially the strikes on Iran by the US are as illegal as the Russian strikes on Ukraine.
Correct.
And this idea that we have pressure being brought to bear so that Albanese and Wong have to firm up their position certainly goes against, Simon Crean's first tenet, which was never allow our foreign policy to be determined by another nation. Doug, do you think part of the pragmatism that we're seeing, and really unfortunate pragmatism that we're seeing from the government, is simply because they are in government, and that Simon Crean was very courageous at the time of the Iraq War, but he wasn't the one who was having to make the decisions and deal with Washington?
I think that's an easy analysis to make, but I'm not sure it's the correct analysis. Surely the analysis should be what is in the interests of Australians. And it's not in the interests of Australians to be, militarising the country, using it as a base to attack our largest trading partner, which is China. There's not enough analysis being done as to what this means to the country, what it means to individuals. I mean, I've never been to war, but I must say, I was brought up just after the war in the UK, and I saw all these working class people, my father included, that ended up alcoholics, driven to drink because of their experience in war. It's the working class that will suffer. It won't be the MPs and ministers in the Labour Party. It'll be working class battlers that do the hard yards, and we are opening ourselves up to a new thing, and that is attacks by nuclear weapons by a country that can deploy them against Australia. And that needs diplomacy, not militarism.
Mm. And I've read you comment, and this is in fact exactly what Paul Keating warned us may happen with AUKUS, is that because we've doubled down to such a degree on the alliance with the US via AUKUS, it then kind of gives strength to US kind of assertions that we need to back ourselves in. We need to back them in other areas of geopolitical strategy, that we're all in with America on AUKUS, so therefore it makes it very awkward to challenge them in other areas of their foreign policy and strategy.
Well, there's a bit of that, but the other issue that people need to remember is that if we are forced to go to 3.5% or 5.5% of GDP on militarizing the country, what does that mean for health? What does it mean for education? What does it mean for social security for people? I mean, we get people, I retired to Hobart, and we had the person down here sleeping in a green bin overnight, one of the big bins, died of the cold. And we're spending all this money on militarizing the country. I just think it's crazy. I think there needs to be an organized campaign against this, and people need to know the facts.
And you use the word forced then, Doug, to talk about increased military GDP. What does that mean for sovereignty, forced? Are we in charge of our budget?
Well, we are being forced, and it's clear that, the Europeans have conceded, NATO has conceded to this approach already, and we will end up facing it. So there's a responsibility on the government to indicate what the implications are for social security in this country, for wages in this country, for the services that we provide, our health system. We have fought against the US trying to get rid of the PBS for years. Will we concede on that? It's being said we won't, but given what's happened now, I would have never thought our Prime Minister, a left Labour Prime Minister, would be standing beside the US in front of a nuclear sub, telling them that we're going to buy these attack submarines to sit up off the coast of China to attack our major trading partner. It's a weird world.
It is a weird world indeed, and a very volatile one. And it is sad for Australians if we don't feel that we can be represented by our government or indeed our parliament, that there are no strong voices coming through, particularly the Labor Party and the Labor movement, on some of these core issues. We've gone on a little bit later because we started a little bit later. But before we go today, apart from thanking very much Josh and Doug for being with us, is there anything which is catching your eye, Josh, a top tip for the week coming up that you would like to let our viewers know about?
I think the main thing that caught my eye recently is an article by Nick Fike on his Substack, which he's kindly shared on social media, about the institutional decline in the face of relentless campaigns by the pro-Israel lobby groups in the country, and the harm that's done to us as a democracy, institutionally, and to the lives of individuals. It's also a sad reflection on the state of the media, that one of the best journalists in the country writing about these issues and many other issues is a guy called Nick Fike, who's on Substack.
Yep.
I don't know that there'd be many media organisations that would employ Nick, because apart from being brilliant, he confronts issues head on that many of those media organisations seem to be very shy about. And so if there's one thing people should look forward to this week, see whether you can track down the article by Nick Fike that was published yesterday.
Yeah, I do recommend that, and recommend you supporting Nick Fyke if you can on his Substack, as well, of course, as supporting us here at The Shot, so that we can stay on air. Doug, it's been a great privilege to have you here with us. Is there anything you would like to highlight for our viewers and listeners before we sign off this week?
I just think the victory in the Democratic pre-selections in New York of Zoran Mandami, who has created chaos in New York, and the world is coming to an end, according to all the billionaires, because we may have a socialist mayor in New York. Woohoo!
It's excellent. I think there was like a Fox News clip which they were going to use as an ad for his campaign for the mayoralty when it comes, which said something like, all rich people now have to band together to stop him. I mean, it is interesting that already there are rumblings that perhaps the Democrats are not going to get fully behind him in a full-throated way. So freaked out are they, which would be a really big mistake, you'd have to say. You know, the Democrats not supporting a left-wing new young leader coming through who has excited such, enthusiasm, would seem to me to be just such a typical Democrats thing to do. But we'll wait and see. But that was a ray of hope and excitement. Dave, anything from you?
Firstly, thanks, Doug and Josh, for the great chat. It's always a pleasure. I just restate what I said before, that some of the words we use really smooth over the reality. And when we're talking about Zionist pressure, we are talking about people that are trying to cover up a genocide and influence your media and your government about that. It's far more insidious than it sounds.
Yeah, I would just like to draw everyone's attention to an op-ed that was written for the Nine papers this week by Rachel Patterson-Collins, who was one of the associates of Dyson Hayden that was found by the Vivian Tom investigation to have been sexually harassed by Dyson Hayden. And she writes very eloquently and powerfully about the campaign to try and rehabilitate Hayden, led by a number of lawyers, including some that we have supported here on the Sunday Shot in the past. Michael Lee, who had such prominence during Brittany Higgins's case, indeed Michael Kirby as well. But she makes the very strong point that none of these men had ever had to deal with him as a predator. And it is really unfortunate that so many in our eminent profession have chosen to back someone who's been found to be guilty of not just sexual harassment, but actually sexual assault as well.
But not Josh.
No, not Josh. Josh was indeed the lawyer for Rachel Patterson-Collins at the time. Is there any last comment you'd like to make on that, Josh? I know I've introduced it very late, but we had so much to get through today.
I'm just amazed, and I read that article. Rachel was the first woman to contact me about Dyson Hayden, and the fear she had at that time was palpable. I just thought it was fantastic to see her come out so eloquently. She's a conservative Catholic. Our politics are radically different, but I really admire what she's said in that article, and it's great that she's her voice is very strong and clear.
Yeah. So thank you all for watching the Sunday Shot. As I say, if you've got a few dollars to chuck our way, we'd gratefully receive them, because we'd love to stay on air at this time when there's so much going on to discuss in the political world. We look forward to seeing you next week on the Sunday Shot.
See y'all.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.